joining us today. Why on earth are we here? Why on earth will we launch a book written by scientists and economists and systems thinkers, which explains how we can avoid the huge climate change, environmental and social disasters caused by human development? Right here, less than 2 miles from the stock exchange that has financed a lot of that development. Why on earth did we invite you, guests from the corporate sector, finance, entrepreneurs and academics, people working in government and non-profit organisations, and people from civil society? For everyone, whether you are with us here in person or joining us online, why on earth does what we're about to talk about matter so much? My name is Nigel Lake, and on behalf of the Club of Rome, my firm Pottinger and Newday Impact Investing, we are thrilled to welcome you today. For everyone who's joining us online, thank you. We will be looking out for your comments and questions in the chat, and we will bring those in as well as we bring in questions from the audience. Please also like this and share this with your friends. Every like amplifies these voices. And use the hashtag as remind me, Earth4, hashtag Earth4. Let me also acknowledge that we're gathered on the land of the Rathmann. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. All too often, we're caught up in the hurry and flurry of day-to-day life. And so many of our decisions are driven by the very short term. So think about this. Today, Britain's Queen was buried, aged 96. She was born in 1926. When she was very young, she met people who were born in the 1830s. The exact same time, by the way, when Joseph Frey figured out that changes in the atmosphere of our planet would change the temperature of the planet, and that could actually be caused by humans. In the last few years, she, and indeed all of us, have met people who will live well into the 22nd century. Think about how much time is touched by people you actually know firsthand. I think about that every day. We have a fantastic program lined up today. A little later on, we're going to hear from impact leaders who represent the Earth's land and water and the inhabitants of that Earth, both humans and creatures, to make us a rich environment. But first, we're going to give you a glimpse into the huge amount of work that has gone into and been distilled into the Earth for All book, which looks like this, and you will all get a copy later on. The German translation is already number 4 on the German non-fiction bestseller list, which is fantastic. So many congratulations. I say a huge amount of work because there was a core team of about 50, there are hundreds more that have contributed, and somehow all that has been distilled. We have good news to share as part of this. Espen, Stocknes, and Sandrine Dixson-Declève will take us through what we need to do and how we can work together to deliver a just and inclusive Earth for all. But we must act urgently and purposefully now. Our societies face clear and present danger. So we're going to start with a dose of reality from Johan Rockström, who understands these threats, I think, as well as anyone on the planet. So the dark part comes first. Johan, over to you.
Then we bring you to the light.
I think I'll stand up because I will see. Yeah, that's such an attractive role to come in with being the dark knight. But I'd like to give you a scientific update, but to do it very much in line with what we set out to do with the Earth for All initiative. This is the 50th anniversary of the very famous Limits to Growth report that the Club of Rome facilitated and led together with MIT Systems Dynamic Modelers that came out in 1972. As you may recall, that report predicted that one potential scenario was that if we continue business as usual, which we actually did throughout the whole reign, actually, of Queen Elizabeth II, because she was born well before we entered the Anthropocene in the 1950s, then we had an exponential rise of pressures on the planet. And if we continued in that pathway, the Club of Rome report showed in one of the scenarios that we would start having a drawdown of the global economy sometime in the 2020s. Well, dear friends, that's where we are. And we have, in the midst of disaster in Pakistan, with 1/3 of the country underwater, 1,500 people dead, with a price tag probably of in the order of $1 trillion US. Well, the world economy is roughly $100 trillion. So you have a 1% abrupt extreme event. And I could go on and use the 7 minutes I have just to list what's happening in the Horn of Africa, with 200 million people marching towards starvation after 5 consecutive years of droughts in Kenya, Ethiopia, Eritrea. You have the first fires in California, you have the exponential rise in heat waves and fires in Europe, and so on and so forth. So it's starting to hit back. Planet Earth is sending invoices at an unprecedented scale right into the world economy. So it's time to really get concerned. Well, the deeper concern comes out of the science over the past 30 years. And just to give you a summary, the entry point into the Earth for all. Number one is that we have entered the Anthropocene. We are now a predominant force of change on planet Earth. We exceed all forces of change from solar orbital forcing, or volcanic eruptions, or earthquakes. We are now in the driving seat, running the planet. We are destabilizing the planet. In the latest science that just came out 2 weeks ago, we show for the first time that 1.5 degrees Celsius of global mean surface temperature rise. We are at 1.3 today, the warmest temperature on Earth since we left the last ice age. So just to remind us, we have already crashed through the warmest temperature on Earth since we left the last ice age 12,000 years ago. And we show now that 1.5 degrees Celsius is a real climate planetary boundary. It has very strong scientific meaning in the sense that go past it, and we likely cross 4 to 5 of the big tipping point systems that we know not only regulates the stability of the planet, but also is directly linked to prosperity, equity, and our own human well-being. And which are these 4 to 5 then? Well, number one is the Greenland ice sheet. Number two is the West Antarctic ice sheet. These two together hold 10 meters sea level rise, and they are likely to be crossed irreversibly at 1.5. Then you have the tropical coral reef system, which I call victim number one of global warming, because they are very likely to be lost at 1.5. And then you have the boreal permafrost systems that are at risk of abrupt thawing, which is a feedback that will just amplify warming even further. And finally is the question of the Bering Sea ice overturning the heat and regional weather regulation. This is the first set of tipping point systems that are very likely going to cross the people at 1.5, and we are at 1.3. The window to hold us to a manageable future is so narrow. So now is the time to really transform. And as if that is not enough, as a kind of a challenge, that the charge of the Earth for all goes well beyond that. Because the reason why they gas, according to exactly what science stipulates, cutting emissions by half every decade for the net zero world economy by 2050, we would still fail. Why? Because we're transgressing the boundaries on biodiversity, on fresh water, on nitrogen, on phosphorus, and on deforestation. So the nature boundaries would themselves push us across the 1.5 line. And this is also well established in science. So there's no choice. We need a transformation. We need exponential journeys towards a safe and just landing within a manageable, resilient planet for all. And that's the Earth for all. And here we have the answers. They will come to us with beautiful flowers and happiness. Over to you, man.
Okay, so relax everyone.
I'm leaving now.
Oh well. So yeah, in case you haven't noticed, the economy keeps crashing. every decade or so, or even more often, and then it balloons up again with some cheap credit, and where does that all end up? So the kids are right. They went to the streets before the pandemic. The signs, the banners said, remember? Systems change, not climate change, right? But then, if you're 16 or 18, and then you're asked, okay, what is the system? And exactly what are the drivers in the system, and how are you going to change those, and what's going to cost? Of course, you can't expect teenagers to have that. So we thought we would get together quite a few people, and in the event of the 50-year update, the first, let's say, global systems model ever made, the one from MIT, let's make a new one. And then, if we can provide not the answers, but at least some answers that are understandable, that you can put in a not too thick book. So for long term, the working title for this was the short book. We tried to make a short book that the kids could read. So this explains the system, and this explains how it can be changed, and we try to approximate the costs. But of course, that depends on what a cost is, really depends on where you sit. Are you a government, are you an investor, etc. So let me do a few quick overviews of how the levers of systems change look like. And of course, nobody reads books anymore, right? You only scroll, is that right? But in case you get to page 5, there, if you have the time to sit down and get to page 5, then you find 5 turnarounds. We call them 1, ending poverty, 2, addressing gross inequality, 3, empowering women, 4, making our food system healthy. Oh, there they are, good. Healthy for people and ecosystems, and 5, transitioning to clean energy. The point is, we didn't, reinvent the wheel here or come up with something utterly new. The issue is that these areas have been analyzed as if they are not interconnected. So you can go to the IEA and you find an energy report. You can go to the World, the UN Development Program and find programs on poverty, and the IMF has the same thing. And then you can go to, let's say, Piketty and the World Inequality Database to find stuff on inequality, and you can go to FAO and there you will find stuff on the food system, or you can have a look at the Eat Lancet and they'll tell you how to change the food system, but as if it didn't connect to poverty, as if it didn't connect to energy. You get it? So if there's anything novel in this, it is that we are providing a systems perspective where we put all those 5 together and then see how do we have to pull on these levers to get the system change at a speed that is required in the face of what you want us to do. That's the ambition. The speed of systems change from all those 5. And then estimates of the magnitude or the amount of money needed to be moved. So let me give you a few numbers. I mean, you're fine now, right? So you're ready for this. And I was asked, what's the $1 million question? And no, the $1 million. Out of the house in New Delhi, and she points out that the current finance system does not provide policy space to low-income country governments. They are very restricted in terms of their financial freedom, in terms of what they are able to get of finance, the interest rates, and not least constrained by patents and trade systems that go against innovation and value creation and jobs in their countries. So we need a jobs and energy-driven growth to solve poverty, and we need to shift about $1 to $2 trillion into new policy space, in addition to debt elimination in those countries that have less than $10,000 per person per year. We have 4 billion people, and what we've learned from Mandela, we should not speak about the North and the South. We shouldn't really speak about the developed world versus the developing world. We should speak about most of the world. And most of the world are 4 billion people living on below $4 per day. How would that be to survive on $4 or $2 or $1 per day? And that's the issue we're up against. So we need $1 to $2 trillion annually increase in the policy space to create green and inclusive jobs to do something with that. That was the first. The second, inequality. Today, about $10 trillion are shifted in global transfers through governments to low income, whether it's through health services or it's particularly social transfers. And in order to generate a giant leap in all the world's 10 major regions, you have to double and triple that. So our suggestion is to take a little fraction of the incomes of the top 10% richest. They control about 50% of the income, so that's $50 trillion. So a few percentages of that is enough to shift the world to a tolerable level of inequality. And now time is running out, so I can't go deeper on that. Empowerment. $5 trillion is spent on education. How much of that do you think goes to women in low-income countries? 5 to 10% at best, 10% in all low-income countries, and less than half of that to women. So, fraction goes to where it needs to go. And the benefits there are incredible. So if we educate all women and they get access to jobs, suddenly we have a 10 to 50, maybe even 20 trillion net gain to the global economy. That's the ultimate boost to GDP per person growth, is that women get access to education and work. For food, we spend $200 to $300 billion on subsidizing food that destroys the planet. We can shift that, or we can add the same amount in subsidies for regenerative and sustainable agriculture. And the last, energy. We spend about $5 trillion annually in direct and indirect subsidies to the energy industry. If we shifted a little bit of that towards increasing the annual investment in renewable energy from about 300 billion to, let's say, $1.5 trillion per year, then we're on track to achieve what Johan says, the 1.5 carbon law pathway. So this is the issue, guys. We need to move those trillions. How are we going to do that, Sandrine?
Trillions, and how are we going to inspire people when they actually read this book to be part of the journey? I think that would be what we want to do. Not only to simplify and to simplify our findings, but to make them encompassing of everyone, so that everyone can find their place in this story. The novelty of this is actually threefold. The first is that we did try, with Jayati and many others, to set up a transformational economics commission of scientists and economists from across the globe that could stress test the findings, bring it back to where they were, and bring it out to us so we can understand what is the situation on the ground, not just get so caught up in the modeling that we're actually separate from what's happening every day in their lives, what they're seeing, where they are. Because it was important for us to make sure that most of the world felt that they were part of this book, not just 3 Caucasian from Europe with one woman. That was very important. Novelty number 1. Novelty number 2. It is not environmental tipping points that are a great existential risk. It is the social tipping points. That is what came out so firmly. It is absolutely fundamental that we get those first 3 tipping points right, that we get those first turnarounds. And the focus has to be on those 3, poverty, inequality, and empowerment, in order for us to ensure that we do live within the planetary boundaries. That was novelty number 2, and that's fundamental as we sit here during Climate Week and UNGA, and as we go to COP, to remember the link between poverty, inequality, and climate change. It's not technology people that are going to solve the problem. Shifting the trillions to technology answers are not what's going to get us out of this mess. It's understanding innovation in governance. It's understanding innovation in the politics that start to service people, planet, and prosperity at the same time. That shift us from the compound effects of those tipping points that we're seeing today. That's novelty number 2. Novelty number 3 is we decided we could not be the only storytellers. We had to bring in 4 women from across the globe, seeing from their eyes the shift between 2 scenarios. The too little too late scenario, where actually population growth continues at a rate which will not be acceptable within the planetary boundaries, that the temperature continues to get to a level where we know, and you already see it now, we are going to be at increasing crisis point, 2.5 degrees, and more. And then the giant leap scenario, where we can stay within the planetary boundaries, where we can innovate. Again, not only look at technology solutions, but address poverty, address inequality, by making sure that at least those low-income countries can guarantee $15,000 salaries for their people per annum. That we can actually look at special drawing rights, that we can look at debt cancellation as a real option, in particular now, as we see the issues of the compound effects of the 3 Cs, COVID, climate, and conflict. That we start to look at the wealthiest in society, and for those of you who are in finance, to understand that the over-financialization of the economy is not servicing people. It's not servicing the planet, and it's definitely not servicing prosperity. The over-financialization of the economy demonstrates that shareholder value comes before people, that you can fire 10,000 people and your shares can still go up. That's a dysfunctionality within our current economy. What we try to say, through those 2 deep scenarios, is that if you take the giant leap, and if you imply that you can actually put those 5 turnarounds in place, which we think you can, only 2 to 4% GDP per annum, to actually translate this into reality, so that we can shift from a GDP economy, from a growth and extractive economy, into a well-being economy. That's the vision. That's the future. That future vision and the solutions that we have now moved from a book to a movement. A movement that encompasses the journey that we all need to join in our own ways, but also by holding each of us accountable, by holding our governments accountable, by holding businesses accountable, and holding the financial sector accountable. Because at the end of the day, as Sharon Burrows, one of those commissioners that sat with us, head of the Trade Union Confederation, so clearly says, there are no jobs on a dead planet. There's no stock market on a dead planet. None of us will survive the temperatures that we are facing if we continue to not think about an Earth for all. That's why this is a survival guide for humanity.
So, we'd like to open up questions, comments. Please, yes. Is there a microphone available? Yes. And also, if there's any from the people holding this on screen, and Till there will help you see if it's just call on Till to have the next one. Please.
My name is Sam Teicher. I'm one of the co-founders of Coral Seabed, the grow corals to restore dying reefs. we're trying to but it's usually people only looking for larger scale solutions, and so there's this chicken and egg gap because how can you actually get to the larger scale if no one funds things earlier? So I'm just curious if there's any thoughts on how particularly people in the finance community might be able to help solve that problem as well.
Terrific. I can give a short comment and then the next question. So I happen to be an entrepreneur myself, so I've done my round. Where we see that unless we get government that is willing to become entrepreneurial, and then that again depends on the level of social trust. Because if government goes alone and the public has no trust in government, then we will not have entrepreneurial thrust and speed. So this is part of the transformational economics work that we're building on the mission approach of Mariano Mazzucato, for instance. And one of the uniquenesses of this model is that you can have a look at the active state, how active and how big these missions have to become if you are to achieve the sufficient rate of change in technology across the economy. But that only is possible as long as the government is able to keep its legitimacy among its citizens. So that dynamic between the mission and the social trust, that's the one you have to have a look at. And we're experimenting with different versions of that in the model. And you can play with it too if you want.
Can I just add to that question, and then I'll build hopefully on the next question. There's been a great deal of discussion within the philanthropy community to see how they can kickstart projects at much smaller levels. And this is coming up continuously. So I do think that there is a real shift, especially as we're noticing as well, community projects typically are smaller, and some conservation projects as well. That discussion, though, truly needs to match supply and demand. And often the problem is that the philanthropists don't know the projects. So there is some new thinking. Active philanthropy, for example, is creating a holding base for a series of projects. It will all be online. And that is so that they can start to match supply and demand.
Good. Thanks, Sandrine. So, another question, please.
I wouldn't mind so much your question. It's not your video, I will put in my questions. And my point is about think about mindsets. It's changing mindsets. We can do those set up all these entrepreneurships, etc. But generally, we haven't changed the mindsets. You're giving us the evidence, yes, but are people really listening? Are they changing their mindsets? And this is the reason why Rathmann was saying, all you do is blah, blah, blah. Because we're talking all the time, but our mindsets are changing. But how do we begin to work with each other in a way that we begin to shift this mindset? So that when we're moving these trillions of dollars, it's actually for change. My second point that I want you to look at is this word empowerment. It's really done in this. Try and unpack it. We really want to empower women, and we want women to have power to move and change things. So those are the 2 points I really want to make.
We want to go to a few, we'll do a few and then one.
I'm sorry.
I'm Susanna. I'm with Philippe Investor, a small financial advisory, and we provide also intermediaries to corporates and most small investors. My question, actually I have 2 questions. Hopefully short, but if there are any examples that you know of governments that are already on the track or some sort of track doing, implementing your ideas. So that's, one is like if there's any government doing it already, And the second is more specific to the United States. And what do you think the United States could do there? Is there any hope that the United States can take a bigger role in the global crisis that we're actually having? So, sorry if I'm critical, but I think that there's a problem.
Yeah, one more question. That is.
Sorry, hi, my name is Lauren. Often I go by Logo and I represent the Resolution Project. And so I wanted to ask more in depth of the inequality piece of your work. It dives into also inequity as well and talking into the different sectionalities of people of color, people with disabilities, the LGBT plus community, which is something that our organization really tries to make sure that we provide resources for, but definitely in this space, because I think these are areas where we know they exist, but I don't think it's something that is spoken on a lot, especially in these spaces, but it's great that you bring that up, but it's something where when we talk about equality and equity, that's where we really get to equality in the end, right? So I'd love to hear more about that.
Thanks. I think we can do a round of responses now. Johan, you speak with.
Yeah, I can start briefly on your point on mind shift. I think we should not underestimate the degree by which we already see a mind shift in the world. It's quite, it's really surprising when we look at the data on the fact that essentially any country in the world, roughly 60 to 70% of citizens are deeply concerned about climate change. They trust science and they want action. But politically and in media, that's not reflected at all. So we have an enormous, bizarre mismatch across the world, and it's probably most polarized in the US, in particular, much less so in Europe, and less so in Southeast Asia, for example. But I think we're in the midst of a mind shift. And that mind shift actually has a lot to do also with the pandemic, when we suddenly wake up and see that when something goes wrong in one corner of the planet, in Wuhan, it suddenly propels in accelerated, unprecedented speed across the entire world economy, and it shuts down the whole system. And that is exactly what we're talking about when it comes to climate change, or risks with regards to environmental change. And if something goes wrong in the Amazon, it will hit back on all of us. And this interdependence between all citizens in the world, I think, is starting gradually to sink in. Much too slowly, but it's starting to sink in. That's one part of the volatility in the world right now. That we're living in an unprecedentedly turbulent time. And we talk only about the geopolitics and the pandemic, but there's also this shakiness in the very life support base. So I think we shouldn't give up on the fact that we're seeing a mind shift, but it has to go much, much faster. And what we're suggesting in the Earth for All is, I agree, a bit challenging, because we're saying that we're in this urgency point. It's an emergency. We're running out of time. All scientific evidence shows this. So we cannot wait for a completely new economic paradigm in the world. We cannot wait for everyone to have climbed out of their closets. So we have to move with the current system and make it work. That's why we list all these policy measures to kind of correct market failures, for example. And that is within the old paradigm, I agree. But it's kind of part of a thinking in dual terms. It's kind of both paradigm shifts and operating within the current system. And we believe that is the way to go. And why is that told as well is because there's so much evidence, which also Sandrine points out, that if we succeed, we will have much better outcomes for both the economy, of course, but also for equity and for health and for security. So there's a you could say with a high degree of, it's an interesting hypothesis, but it's more than a hypothesis that if you really start succeeding on the sustainability turnaround, you're likely to get a ball rolling that starts self-perpetuating in the right directions. So of course that would almost be like self-creating that mind shift. So I think there's some tactics here as well.
Yeah.
Building on the mindset shift, I think it's a perfect question, because the other thing that we do need to be honest about, there are about 30 contributors to those commissioners that were part of our discussions. And let's remember, and in fact, the privilege of being at the Club of Rome is that we have always honored different thought leadership and theories of change. And there are many who did not agree with some of the deep paradigm shifts that we are putting here, but felt that it was all about mindset shift. And there are others who felt that actually we needed to do the paradigm shift first, and then others would join the journey. I think there are several aspects to this. There are other discussions that are happening around how do you create that mindset shift? And conversations with one of our commissioners, actually, who will come out with a new book, very much showing that societal's addiction with consumption and growth cannot be treated in the way in which we're treating it now with regard to climate narratives. What he clearly says is individual addiction and therapies for individual addiction should be used for societal therapy, which is creating that vision that there is another future. And so in that sense, I think we've done the right thing. What we're trying to do here is show there is another way. And we can get there. The idea of the movement is then to build on that, to have citizen assemblies, to work with governments, to show them not only the policy recommendations, but also help them so they don't get caught with their pants down. When they've got the Gretas who are saying, what the hell are you doing? That's our responsibility. And that's how we feel that sense of responsibility. That it is time to work together to give another vision, but we also have to show that accountability principle. So that's the first. And giving some, we didn't talk about universal basic dividend for the citizen fund, which is a novel idea of how we redistribute wealth. And is already being done in Norway and also in Alaska, for example. With regard to the governments, there are governments that are actually putting in place well-being indicators that have decided that they're moving beyond GDP. That's Finland, New Zealand, Scotland, Iceland, and Wales. And those governments actually coming out of COVID were much more resilient. But why were they also resilient to criticism from people and citizens? Because they communicated with the citizens differently. And that's also part of the message that we try to give, which is communication has to change. We need to start being honest about the current prospect of our economic dysfunctionality, and we need to be honest about the possibilities of that future vision. It'll get harder before it gets better, but together, hopefully, we can get there.
Yeah, we have a question. Okay, let's do a question zero to D20, and then two questions.
And hold on, inequality. Do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, but I see time coming up.
Oh, we're good on time. No, it's an
But
important.
yeah, it connects to two things. The issue of inclusiveness in terms of ethnicity and color, and also this word of empowerment that you were focusing on. We struggle so much with that. You have no idea. We all struggle with it. Yeah, thank you. So, when we say empowerment of women, we met resistance, not least from some of our African members, because what you don't need is forgetting about the men and pushing them too much to women, and then you get a toxic masculinity hitting back. That's not what we're speaking about. We're speaking about a gender equity issue. And that is also across race and ethnicity. So, I also want to pick up one more thing that is we gave a word to me in terms of Greta, because there's also a generational split between the young and the elder generation, which is equally important. And I fully understand the young generation's frustration, their fear and their outrage, and the willingness to say blah, blah, blah. But on the other hand, I mean, that's the job of youth. But doing that always means you're not really recognizing how many people are actually stepping up and how many solutions actually are emerging, how many investors are actually changing, how many companies have started to transition. So suddenly, all that work that millions of NGOs and companies and associations are doing all over the world becomes invisible because the media prefers to do the apocalyptic stories and the collapse stories and the polarization. It does not represent that millions and billions of actions currently happening So I've told that to Greta. Actually, we have a new book coming out where I think both you and I are writing chapters along, and I'm taking that issue up with Greta. That it is understandable that they are angry, and when you do that, you do not see the extent of the mindset shift that has begun. And I think we should at least speak about 3 times as much about all the opportunities and the things that are happening in the world as we speak about the threats and how little is happening. So that's part of that narrative change.
So let me then defend Gabe a little bit. Because I talked to her last week. And so, but I mean, I think it is important just to have, there are two dimensions. I mean, her frustration in Glasgow was that politicians promise and they don't deliver. And that is different to the fact that you have so many good examples of action from different actors where things are not adding up globally and the countries are promising things and they're not delivering. That's the frustration. And I think that is something that we should not necessarily mix with mindset, because that can be operating within our current system. I mean, delivering within our current system is about cutting global emissions by half in a decade. Just do it. Just do it. And then that was her frustration there, and I think one should stand by that. And so it's, I think it's a kind of a, both parts can be fit in the same book.
So this perfectly illustrates, can you imagine having 30 thought leaders, everybody in the same room trying to get their arguments across. So it's been, okay, 2 more questions and then we close. First, you, yeah, just behind that.
And then just one more.
Yeah, and then, please. Yeah, so keep it close to the mouth.
First of all, thank you so much for your thoughts. And the little nugget is always makes sense. But I was going to say, I think that change management is the real issue here. I'm a big student of that because I think how to make everyone change is as important as the details of why we need to change. And the thing that struck me, as you said, it's not about developed or developing countries, et cetera, et cetera. You gave the $1, $2, and of course you're all about we're sitting in New York City. My biggest thought is that we sit here in the United States. The equity market is $44 trillion, and that's a huge part of what we're talking about needs to be done. The low income or poverty part of this nation has risen by 4%. Middle class has declined by 10 as well, and the upper class has risen by 6%. The VC community has only given 2.7% of its money to women and 1.7% to people of color as well. The data is brutal here on all of the things you're talking about. How do we get Americans to change before we try to change the world? And if you've got a good idea, I'm American, I'm all with you, please call me, I'm happy to show you. And I don't my days, I'm going to call that too.
So, all the way back to the stairs.
Okay, and there was a gentleman here, but we can go back into the second part.
Nigel, you have to come out, and Doug Hess, you have to come up and break us off at some point.
I'm going to do that after this question.
Okay.
I'll try to be speedy.
I know we're running out of time. Please.
Ian Monroe with Eco Capital and Stanford University, and we partner with Newday on the climate action strategy that they run. So we, along with Newday and a number of others, and invite anybody else in this room interested, are helping launch a new climate positive investing alliance that is really trying to unite investors who are serious about taking climate action and getting portfolios well beyond net zero to net climate positive much, much faster than 2050. One of the things that we've been working on trying to incorporate it into the membership pledge is something related to basically all the referral principles. How do we ensure that climate investing is not trampling on indigenous rights, on diversity, equity, inclusion, justice initiatives, and all the different pieces we talked about. So if you were to craft a single line, ideally, that all investors who are serious about taking climate action would sign on to, what would you want that to be? What do you want those of us who are serious about climate action to also be pledging to do in terms of the overall framework that you're proposing with Earth for All?
Go ahead, I've got one.
Briefly, I think we have to stop the American habit of looking for a single bullet to solve everything, the one thing we can do. So we need a stable buckshot, and we use 15 of them on page 170 That's the problem with doing systems thinking. A system is complex, and you change just one parameter, it doesn't go all the way through because a system tends to regenerate in structure rather than being changed. So you have to do a lot of things all the time to avoid the system regenerating its own habitual behaviors. And that's why we need at least 5 and possibly 15 dollars to have that system changed. Please.
Our Earth shot is 0 carbon, 0 poverty, 0 inequality, 0 biodiversity now.
And I'll concretize that a little bit more than just to say, what does zero really mean? I think my advice to anyone sitting, as you're doing, is to advise that from now on, we can no longer allow any loss of intact nature. So it means any investment in any kind of offsetting is not allowed anymore because you have to simply get off fossil fuels, get to zero, and you have to keep nature intact, zero loss. And these two are two very hard guiding principles which kind of collide actually with a lot of thinking because it's so attractive for companies and financial institutions to try and kind of tactically compensate inability of phasing out fossil fuels with investments in different kind of nature climate solutions and doing it in an unscientific offsetting manner. And this is something that we have to help each other work together on kind of tidying up. And then finally, just on the US, I think what the US has to do is in a way quite simple. It has to learn a bit more, not necessarily going as far as Earth for All in terms of wealth redistribution, but there has to be a stronger social contract and responsibility for all those in the US that are losing. I mean, if you look at the last 20 years in the US, just as you say, the average household in the US are going backwards, not forward. And of course, that is what's causing a lot of the polarization in the country. And I think there's a lot to learn from for example, the Nordic region and some parts of the world that have been trying at least to hold off for this polarization, which by the way is not hitting these countries as well. So we're in a very difficult situation, sliding, moving along a US pathway also in some of the countries that have been trying to fight off that inability of holding off that discrepancy between the has and the have-nots.
Thank you. Actually, we have there's one last thing, and that is I'd like to mention special thanks to the Rathmann Foundation, who is in the room now and helped this project get going. Without your help, we would not
So, thank you very much. We are going to have a change now to bring Doug Heskey and his colleagues out. Please stand with other names mentioned in the credits at the beginning of the book, which is just a tip of this particular line. So, just as the guests leave, the microphones on the chair, and Doug, if you welcome your guests up, they can get settled in afterwards. Fantastic. And maybe whilst they're doing that, I'll just make a couple of very quick comments. Firstly, if there are any questions from the live stream, please do bring them to us. We'll try to work those in. We know that the audio quality has been somewhat patchy. Apologies for that. There will be recording afterwards where the audio will be much better. These glitches can happen. And just as this is what gets set up for this session, and everybody gets their mics lined up, I think that the interesting thing to think about in the whole point of this session which comes now is that the solutions we need for most of what we need to do, we have today. We don't need new technology for many of those things, and part of the point of this session is to be able to see what's happening in real life.
Can you just get the mic word behind you? Use the mic word, yeah.
I think we're going to
Now, over to you.
mic up through here anyways. Ian, first of all, I want to thank you for your thoughts. Admirable efforts, okay, and Newday is very pleased to be a part of what you're pulling together. We could not be moving any faster right now, so I think very critical for all of us to pay attention. It's an amazing week for us. So we start today through the Earth for All book launch project. We are concluding this week with a listing of our second exchange traded fund on the New York Stock Exchange as a symbol SDGS, and have a number of people from our youth community as a part of these organizations who are good friends and partners that will be joining us up on the podium on Friday. So it is both fitting and humbling to be sitting here on the stage with all of you, given that this is an incredibly important event in New York. Not only is this the first day of Climate Action Week, but we're in the middle of the 78th General Assembly, and one that is being held during a period of time whereby we are facing major social and environmental degradation. The theme for this year's conference at the UN is Watershed Moment, Transformative Solutions to Interlocking Challenges. Earth for All has now given us a blueprint for how we ought to address these challenges. While we understand what should be done, one of the biggest challenges that we have as a society is bridging this chasm between action, or between awareness and action. And the paradox today is that the people that are on the very forefront of climate impact, at least in their own minds, don't necessarily recognize that the small carbon footprints that they have can make a meaningful difference. But the time has changed for all of us to be aware of the fact that we all have to pitch in to save the planet. And this is why we're here today. So it is not by coincidence that we are joined by this incredible group of distinguished impact leaders, all addressing these interlocking challenges. Each of you are doing incredibly important work, tackling the problems in conservation, ocean health, clean water, and education and skill development through the work that you're doing at GenU and UNICEF. All of you have chosen in some regards to focus on the youth community or younger members of our generation, because it's so important to our future as we are breeding, raising, cultivating the leaders of tomorrow. And this month is truly a watershed month, as climate change and other associated challenges are now accelerating rapidly. Economic costs, as we discussed today, may exceed more than $2 trillion a year just here in the US, and fixing this problem will cost hundreds of billions more. Certainly, events like Iman Chenard's gift to fight climate change will have a meaningful impact on that, but there needs to be a lot more. These costs can be financed through a combination of innovative financial tools, some of which are being deployed in your organizations today. And while capital is a critical component of what we're doing, there's so many other things that are essential to solving the problem around advocacy, around using your shareholder voices to encourage organizations to change. And we ourselves at Newday Impact recognize that true impact is made not just through investment in sustainable companies, but by using capital as a force for change, in driving consumer behavior, investing behavior for the nation. And as we like to say, capital plus advocacy equals impact. This afternoon, we'd like to explore some of the innovative ways in which capital is being put to work for good. Joining us this afternoon are Anna Rathmann, the Executive Director for the Jane Goodall Institute, a global organization committed to inspiring people to conserve our natural world. Philippe Cousteau, who's beaming in from California, founder of Earth Echo International, who is building a global youth movement to protect and restore the oceans. Georgie Badiel Liberty, founder of the Georgie Badiel Foundation. GBF is a partner of Newday's and doing amazing work associated with well restoration and women's empowerment in Georgie's home country of Burkina Faso. And Nadi Albino, the Deputy Director of Partnerships for UNICEF Generation and Work. So Nadi, I'd like to start with, we've talked about this idea of using capital as a force for good. Certainly Generation Unlimited is doing powerful things in the youth community, empowering tens of millions of younger people to go out and take action today. In fact, associated with our own exchange traded fund launch, a portion of our revenues will be going back to support the JMU initiative. Can you talk a bit more about what you're doing at JMU and why this work ends up being so important?
Thank you very much. I think first and foremost, I'd like to say that Johan is powerful. I think that's the core of what we call ourselves public private partnership. And we're powered by it. We have the ideas, we have the solutions, how to deal with it. I come from the continent of Africa. 70% of our population is underprivileged certified. Globally, I think it's close to 40% or more of the population being underprivileged. So I think when we talk about generational divide, it's not just a question of teenagers going out and thinking about changing the climate and worried about what the future they're going to inherit is going to be like. But we're talking about 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds and 55-year-olds who are living in this world today, who are leaders in of themselves, who understand the systems that we work with, and who can be the disruptors that we can work with. I think my biggest challenge is that we don't work with young people as if they too understand that the challenge of this world, they do it. I think that we talk too much in a pop-out now with the same leaders of tomorrow. You know, we are skilling you for future jobs. The future bring jobs. It's not the future, it's here and now. We've heard the scientists talk already. And these skills we can now. We understand what those skills are. We understand what those jobs are. And those are the kind of things that we find. How do we work with these young people? Draw in these ideas that they have and solutions, and then mobilize the capital around the world so that we can invest in these ideas and solutions, so that young people can help us to drive this world back. I think that's the fundamental thing that we're trying to do in generation. And limited, I want to work with different programs that we have, you know, with agriculture, we're looking at entrepreneurship, green entrepreneurship, how we work with that. We're working with, you know, big corporates now and foundations, etc. So how we develop really practical programs in countries that can help our people come up and do the kind of things that needs to change the world. I think we cannot depend on politicians anymore. I think we cannot depend on systems anymore. How do we work with young people so that we do about the current reality for a better future?
Nadia, please. We'd love to explore some of the work that you're doing with organizations like Newday and whatnot, really powerful incentives that are being brought into the community. But let's move on to Philippe Cousteau. Philippe, as many people know, is the grandson of Rathmann Cousteau, who many of us in this room grew up with on Sunday nights. Philippe has an extraordinary understanding of how to use capital as a tool for change. Philippe, you shared with Ann and I some time ago that you wanted a seat at both tables. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and how ECHO is addressing the capital question today?
Well, thank you everybody for having me be a part of this wonderful event, and of course over this wonderful week and all the terrific work that Newday has been doing. We're thrilled to be a partner now in a few years and very excited about our work. What I meant by sitting at both tables, you know, is about 13 years ago now that I was at the Global Initiative, and they were talking about the size of global financial markets and the size of charitable giving, and the disparity between the two. And it was at that point where I realized that, you know, we really need to look at market-based solutions as much as we look at charitable solutions to these problems. And so I've been involved in financial markets now for a little while, but continuing to pursue my work with ECHO as well, because the other big piece that, you know, and you've touched on it a few times, that we have overlooked and underinvested in the environmental movement is education, in the sense that, in my opinion, we have very much focused on tactical solutions to the environmental crisis. My grandfather talked about this decades ago when he said, you know, before we talk about conservation, we have to talk education. And what you realize is that the way we create systemic change in society that can drive the long-term, durable, and that's very important, the durable support for conservation is through education. So often we have been focused on short-term fixes, trying to protect land, pass a law, whatever it may be, that I've seen over and over in my career, as my grandfather and father and members of our family have witnessed. And there's one, I remember one head of a very large environmental NGO came to me lamenting one time, and said, the problem is we put some land aside in the conservation pantry, and then the next politician comes along from a different party and decides that they want to take it out of the conservation pantry, so to speak. And so, until you build and invest in creating a strategic approach and a durable approach to conservation, start building a society that cares, we're not going to see the long-term support and shift for the kinds of real innovative systemic changes that we need. We've seen this, one great example recently, which we're finally starting to see that shift. Part of work with a lot of scrappy organizations like the ones here on this panel and myself and others, but over the years, working with, frankly, the pittance of charitable giving to do this kind of work. Tiny fraction of charitable giving goes to the environment, and even more less than that, of course, goes to the ocean and to education. And what we found with the most recent election is that finally, for a new generation, you look at motivating factors for them from their voting perspective, their voting behavior, and climate is one of those issues. And in a recent study that came out just before the last presidential election, it looked at what states in the United States where young people have the most potential to affect the outcome of the election. And indeed, it was young people in swing states like Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Florida. And so what we have underinvested in, and I think neglected our own peril, is how we invest in education and building a society that cares about these kind of issues and actually support it. It builds durability for the kind of political and economic changes that we need. And that's what we do. In fact, though, particularly focus on the ocean. I should also just give a shout out to the ocean. We continue to talk about terrestrial solutions to the climate crisis. We need to focus more on ocean-based solutions to the climate crisis. One mangrove forest can absorb, 4 to 5 times more carbon than a terrestrial forest. Seagrasses, kelp forests, we grow 2 feet in a day. So I just want to throw in a quick shout. I wouldn't be a Cousteau, I think, without saying the importance that we have neglected. Coastal and marine and ocean ecosystems are our greatest allies in fighting this crisis. And also, in many cases, kelp forests, for example, providing good sustainable jobs for local communities that can be outsourced. So I'll leave it there because I'm going to make a little bit of that.
Philippe, thank you very much, and we'll come back to you in just a moment. I would like to call out that none of the individuals that are on stage are shy to collaborate. So Philippe and Georgie and Anna and others have participated with one another on podcasts in support of all of the work that their respective organizations do. So I would like to turn to Georgie. And Georgie probably needs little introduction. She was the former Miss Burkina Faso, former Miss Africa, but most importantly, she turned a very successful modeling career into one where she became a successful social entrepreneur, setting up the Georgie Badiel Foundation to benefit her home country of Burkina Faso. We had one constituent mention to us that Georgie's work is the true definition of sustainability. So Georgie, you are doing amazing things. Please share with us the work with GBF and now what you're doing on a number of very important water projects and how you're allocating capital to those projects.
Absolutely, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I actually started the Georgie Badiel Foundation not because I wanted to have an organization, because it was so much needed. As a young girl, I used to walk 3 hours to fetch water with my grandmother and my cousin girls. Fetching water wasn't something that I liked because I am not a morning person. So every morning, my grandmother would come at the door, knock, knock, Georgie, let's go get the water. And I was mad. I would go behind the house, 5-30 minutes, come back, get my bucket, and before walking, get the water. As I grew, I was blessed to become Miss Burkina Faso in 2003, following that Miss Africa. After that great success, I would say, I was again blessed to go to Paris to start an international modeling career. I have to tell you that living in Paris is so amazing. You know, I could take a bubble bath anytime I wanted. Showers and life is beautiful. Until I went back home to visit my sister who was almost 9 months pregnant. And my sister has to wake up between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. to get home. That is when I knew that the system is completely broken. And I felt frustrated with that because as a kid, we used to do that. And now she's a woman, my sister has to do it. So I came back to New York and I met with a friend, a model friend. I tell her about my trip, I was mad, and furious. She said, "We should start an organization." I'm like, an organization? We don't have that time. I'm like, sure, if that can help, let's do it. We started this movement called Models for Water. And with that organization, 100% of the funds we were raising were going through other organizations so that they can build wells in Africa, whatever they want. Some of these organizations wouldn't work in my grandmother village. And at some point, we realized that we wanted to do good, but it was actually a full-time job. We couldn't be models on the runway and at the UN at the same time. So my friend decided to stop Models for Water. I was completely heartbroken. I said, my grandmother village still don't have access to clean water, so what do I do? So I decided to share my childhood story with Penguin, which for the deal I worked with New York Times best-selling authors Susan Bell and Philippe to create the Water Princess. So I said, you know what, 100% of my book funds will go to access to clean water, and they will build the first well in my grandmother village. I was so excited. So we found an organization, we gave them money to that organization, and it was so much money that they could have built almost 3 wells if they wanted. But I wanted that only 1 well, and I was going to raise more money for that organization. That organization took the money, they went to my grandmother village, and they came back with the excuse that, oh, we don't know how they will take care of the well. So they did not build the well in my grandmother village. Again, I got very frustrated. I said, I am going to stand up and start my own organization. That is actually how the Georgie Badiel Foundation was born. I felt that if I don't stand up for the people of my country, we will not be able to break the cycle of the water princesses. So in 7 years, we were able to bring access to clean drinking water to over 300,000 people. But most importantly, the Georgie Badiel Foundation, at the beginning, when I started the organization, I would go to some villages and I would see that there was a well. And women still have to walk 2 hours, 3 hours away from their village to fetch water. And I couldn't understand why. And the argument was that, oh, we don't know how to fix it. The only people that knew how to fix it was like 1 man or 2 that the government actually trained to fix the well that was broken, but they were asking so much money to this woman that the community couldn't afford them. So I said, you know what, I'm going to start to train women to fix these wells. And so far we were able to train over 178 women basic engineering, because building wells is engineering, and transforming lives. So I will stop here.
please approach Georgie. I'd like to now talk to Anna. So several years ago that we were introduced to the Jane Goodall Institute in Jane, of course, and she has done a number of events for us. Anna is their executive director. They are running a program called Roots and Shoots, which is specifically targeted on the youth community. Again, doing amazing work, but on an international scale. So Anna, tell us more about this and the work that you're doing at JPI. So
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Newday, for having us here. And as anyone who knows me, get better at this. Sorry. Here we go. Anyone who knows me knows that Roots and Shoots is one of my favorite things to talk about. So if I have an opportunity to talk about Roots and Shoots, I take it. So thank you for this opportunity. At the Jane Goodall Institute, we had a youth empowerment program. It was started 30 years ago by Jane and a group of 13 young people. And it came about by a lot of what we're talking about today. Jane was hearing from some of these young people that she was working with. It was in Tanzania, it was in Dar es Salaam. And they gathered together for an informal dinner, and they're talking, and these young people are expressing frustration, anxiety, anger about what's happening in their environment. And Jane suggested, well, why don't we get together? Why don't we start something? And everybody agreed. Well, what should we call it? Well, Roots and Shoots. And from that 13 young people, this global program was born. It now operates in 65 countries around the world. It's a grassroots program that so much of what we are talking about here too, of how do you create that groundswell of enthusiasm and innovation and creativity and not do a top-down authoritarian. This is a program that fosters that, where young people have to do work that focuses on animals, the environment, and communities. So all three pillars are met. And among Roots and Shoots, we have this kind of rallying cry, which I love. And I was thinking about it, so many of the presenters were speaking today. And that is, and according to legend, and this is coming from Jane, so I believe it, that at that final kind of dinner where Roots and Shoots was born, Jane says, okay, well, together, the students said, well, together we can. She said, yeah, together we can change the world. But I think we need something stronger. Together we will. And that phrase, together we can, together we will. To join hands across the world, to join hands across sectors as we're doing here today, and to look at solutions that are innovative, that are sustainable, and that work for all of us, because ultimately this is our one planet. So that is Roots and Shoots in a nutshell. And I'd be happy to talk with them and read more about that.
And thank you so much. Very quickly here, I wanted to alert everybody that our guests are going to be at the back of the room, happy to take individual questions. I also want to recognize Nigel Bacon Pottinger for the incredible work that they've done. Johan, Sandrine, thank you. I will also note that there are a number of other impact leaders that are here today. Johan is in the room, who is with UNHCR here. Thank you for coming. The UNICEF team will also be here. Sam, thanks for bringing your team as well. Great to see you. And thank you all for coming. This is very, very important work, and I hope that you'll tune in on Friday afternoon for the bell rings. And Anna and Georgie and Philippe, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you all so very much for being here. As Georgie said, she was not a morning person. I can certainly vouch for that. I'm definitely not a morning person. And for me, this project progressed at 4 a.m. once a month. And I've never been that excited at 4 a.m. in my life. Perhaps never again. This group has shown, I think, very well that these are very much real-world problems and that there are real-world solutions, and there are some wonderful people already acting on them, and they need so much more support. I wanted to add my thanks to the Angela K. Bennett Foundation and the Lewis Foundation as well for supporting this work. It's incredibly important. And the one last how on earth question that we have not answered is how on earth did all of this material, and it's unimaginably large and complicated, get into a single book, which is great and easy to read. And there are two words that explain that as far as I can tell, and they are Owen Gaffney. So Owen. So to end out the back there is some delicious coffee, good Australian coffee from Cousteau and some snacks, and we're delighted to chat with you further there. And finally, this book is a powerful guide. You will get one today if you're watching online. Please buy one, please buy several, give them to your friends. For those interested in the really technical stuff, there is a great paper which explains actually how the model works. There's a few copies of that here. They're available online. And the Public Road website has a whole heap of deep dive papers which support the book on all sorts of subjects. And we also have a simpler one designed for, perhaps your grandparents or board directors or others who just want things distilled, which is also out the back, and hopefully it's quite punchy and bringing things all together. So with that, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to chatting afterwards.
You want it on?
To all of you who've joined us on the live stream, thank you so very much for being here today. I know the audio quality was not what we had hoped for, but there will be a recording available afterwards separately which should have much better sound. Thank you very much indeed.